Chris Fox, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
This is pretty surreal because at most writers' conferences that I've been to, podcasts that I've listened to, you've been one of the featured guests. You're a very popular guy, kind of the right to market guy that, for the books that you've written on marketing, especially. And we'll get into that in a little bit. But my first question is titles like "There's no such thing as werewolves," "Vampires don't sparkle." I I tell you what, man, those are so catchy. Where did you come up with those titles?
Twilight. So Twilight came out and it did something terrible to werewolves and vampires. All of a sudden, vampires are sexy and werewolves are cuddly. Like, what? What happened? These are supposed to be scary. This is not okay. And I have no problem with that fiction, but I wanted to answer it with no, werewolves and vampires could be scary. At the same time, I wanted to kind of scientifically explain why they existed. And so I thought catchy titles like No Such Thing as Werewolves would sort of appeal to the right skeptical audience, and it worked.
Well, I tell you, it worked for me because those titles just jumped right out at me. And do you have like a formula of how you pick titles, or they just come to you?
I do. So I'm huge into symbolic recognition. So your goal as an author when you are doing any title for any book is every single word matters. So the fewer words you can use, the better. And every one of them has to evoke something very specific in your reader's mind. So two or three words together can be very, very powerful. And you have to decide what those are.
Outstanding. Yeah, yeah. I mean, people judge a book by its cover, but obviously they're reading the title as well, and that's one of the first things they see. So that makes total sense. Keywords, all that good
Mhm.
stuff. So you've done a lot of stuff in the indie author community, especially, and you're a very interesting person. Why don't you kind of tell us your story? How did all this start?
Okay. Yeah, I haven't done this in a while. I started getting into the whole indie fiction scene back in 2013, because I had met a woman who is now my wife and the mother of my son, Lisa. We had dated via a site called OkCupid, and she was a software engineer just like me. And being a smart, savvy woman, she Google stalked me and found my website. And I had a bunch of fiction on there. So there was a bunch of old short stories and the beginnings of what became No Such Thing as Werewolves.
Hmm.
And so I got to act like I was some sort of fancy pants author. I had published a couple of short stories like 10 years beforehand, like in 2005, so I
Okay.
could say, aha, I'm a published author. I'm super fancy. But I didn't have a novel done. And here's this beautiful woman I'm trying to impress. So I decided, okay, I'm going to try and finish this book. I started reading books on craft. I read a book called Writing the Breakout Novel, really just kind of clicked in my head. And I
Hmm.
used that to plot out the rest of that book, to write it to completion and to publish it. But I was doing it all to impress a girl. I had no idea that there was any money in fiction. I thought what happened is you put your book on Amazon and I get three copies of it delivered to my house. And it's like, aha, I'm an author. You should hang out with me.
Did you have a tweed jacket with the elbow patches and maybe an ascot? That might work for
No,
you.
I was in San Francisco, and the required uniform at that point was a pair of Levi's jeans and a North Face jacket.
Oh, very good, very good. You're the rugged urban guy. Very good, but
Yes.
the author as well. So that well, you know what? It worked. You got married and
Yeah.
you have a kid. So perfect.
And she's the editor for all the books.
Oh, well, even better yet. Now you worked as a software engineer?
I did.
Okay, and that was for Apple?
No, not directly. So I did Apple
Okay.
engineering. I worked for startups,
Okay.
a series of startups. I didn't have a college degree. I had no college degree. I was, working a dead end job, making like $12 an hour, and I hated this job in collections. Absolutely hated it because it was my job to call people who are late on bills. Hey, you're
Oh,
late on your car payment. Where's the money? That
yikes.
guy. That was
Yeah,
my job.
that
So I
guy
was
is
eager
not
to get out
fun.
of
It's
there.
not fun being that guy, no.
No, 100 times a day. So what I did is I picked up a book on iPhone engineering, and this is right when the iPhone came out. Because I said to myself, okay, you can make software on these phones. There's going to be these things called apps that people are going to need. So if I can build those apps, I'm right next to San Francisco. Somebody's going to hire me to do this. And so I taught myself to do it, and sure enough, somebody hired me. And like 3 years later, my app showed up on the Colbert Report. They used it
Really?
to scope, yeah, they used it to scope his ear. So what we did is we had a microscope that you attached to the phone, and then you could record ear exams and send them to a doctor. So if it's 2 a.m., or if you're in a rural village in Africa
Oh,
and you need to check something, you could do
yeah.
medical diagnosis with our app and our technology. It was amazing. And I got to be the guy that was doing the entire app. I was the whole app. Every line of code came from me. So it was such an amazing experience.
And you
And that
taught
was
yourself
probably,
this?
yeah.
Wow, that's incredible.
It's amazing what you can do if you are willing to put your mind to it, especially today.
Sure.
Because if you look at the internet now, I mean, almost any skill can be learned. And sure, it's hard. There were a lot of places like days where I would give up. So I would say, I'm not going to do this anymore.
Hmm.
I would get stuck on a line of code. And there was nothing back then. It was called Objective-C was the language that I used. It was an Apple specific language and nobody knew how to use it. So I couldn't
Okay.
find answers. And sometimes your app just wouldn't run. And after you're hired professionally to make apps, that was still the situation where like there were no answers to certain things.
Wow.
So it was tremendously challenging, but
Hmm.
also really exciting.
Yeah. So you're doing that. Where did you segue to becoming an author and you're a coach, you do a lot of stuff in the author community. Where did that jump out?
I've always believed we should give back, but this specific thing harkens back to, I think, something that'll like really resonate with a lot of your listeners specifically.
Hmm.
Remember when we were kids and you wanted to be an author, and maybe you were into science fiction and or fantasy, and you'd read these books and think, man, I would love to do that for a living, but it's just this impenetrable black wall. There's no way I could ever become a published author. There's no way I could ever be a novelist. That's how I felt growing up. I
Okay.
really badly wanted to be an author, but I saw no route to get there. And then when I figured out, wait a second, there's no gatekeeper anymore. If you understand the slightest thing about data science, you can get your book out there and start making money. And I tried it and it worked. And I'm like, wait, I can show other people how to do this. And I wanted all of the kids that had grown up like I did without the ability to express themselves, without the ability to get their novels out there, to be able to do that. And,
Right.
now today we can.
That's amazing. So when do you remember the moment where you it got in your head and you thought to yourself, "Man, I made it." When you could quit your day job and be an author, is that one of like the light bulb moment, or when did that happen for you?
It still hasn't. I'll let you know when I get there.
Yeah.
Um,
Because you're making a
so
living off of your writing, correct?
Right, but I don't ever get to stop. So it's not like Brandon Sand. This is what I'm imagining Brandon Sanderson is like. It's probably also way harder to be Brandon. So if he hears this, apologies in advance, Brandon. But from the outside looking in, it looks like he maybe gets to take some breaks sometimes,
Hmm.
and maybe there's a day where he's not working on a book. That's never the case with me. I wake up and I work. If I'm not spending time with my family, I'm working all the time. I'm working, and so I do get to tell a living or make a living through telling stories, but it's a tremendous amount of work to like run all your own marketing and do your own taxes and write the books and make sure that you have an artwork pipeline and all the other stuff you've got to get arranged. So it's not necessarily for everybody, but man, the freedom you get is pretty amazing.
Yeah. Well, when did you quit the day job? What was like the threshold? Was it a certain dollar amount, or did you sit down with your wife and say, "Hey, I think this is it, honey"? What was that? What did it look like?
Well, the interesting thing is she didn't care. So it was like, do what you want to do, Chris. So the
Wow.
decision was on me to make, which is hard in that
Yeah.
I didn't really know what metrics to go with. So what I decided is, okay, first I'm going to pay off all debt. So I paid off the last of my credit card debt with my author earnings. And then I
Okay.
started putting money in savings and I saved up a year's worth of expenses. So I looked at, okay, this is
Okay.
all of my bills. This is what it would take me to live, like let's say $50,000 for a year to live fairly lavishly where I lived and pay my rent and my bills. And I made sure I had that saved in a book in an account, and that I was making at least enough to pay my basic bills off of books. And then I jumped.
Wow.
So if I had taken a downturn, I would have been in serious trouble. But my thought was, if you don't burn the boats at some point, and this is kind of a Tony Robbins phrase, if you
Hmm.
don't burn the boats and force yourself to take the island, then maybe you never will. And I knew that if I cut myself off and gave myself no other choice but to be a successful author, I would do it. But if I continue to make it just a side thing I did at my day job, it might get too difficult to run both. And it'd be easy for me to sort of abandon being an author and focus more on software engineering, which I liked, but I didn't
Right.
love it. And I hated working for startups because there were a lot of decisions you couldn't control. And so you'd be forced to build things that you knew were bad that ultimately would harm the product. In being a self published author, I can make all the right decisions and no one gets in my way.
Right, right. So I have seen stories about authors that, they kind of jumped out of the gate pretty good. They saved up some money and they quit the day job, the proverbial day job, and they fell on their faces. And they wound up going back to the day job that they hated, or a day job that they hated even more. And I just really, there's got to be a balance there, I guess is what I'm trying to say. You saved up enough money where, yeah, you could kind of afford to burn the boats, where it's like, hey, I had 1 or 2 good months on Amazon. I'm just quitting and I'm just going, I'm going all in. I'm putting all my chips in the middle of the table. That's you got to do it with some not completely reckless abandon, I guess is the best way to
I
put it.
see people who've never ever written a book, much less sold a book, never written a book, quit their job and say, now I'm going to be a writer. I'm like,
Really?
what are you doing?
Oh my gosh. That's
I,
a leap of faith.
yeah, and I have yet to see anyone do that and actually succeed with it. So usually they're like toiling away on their book still because I mean there's so many skills you have to learn. Like
Oh
it's not
yeah.
something that can be done quickly.
Exactly. Even if you're like a traditionally published, you still have to promote yourself. Maybe you don't have to take care of some of the minute stuff that us indies do, but there's trade-offs for that as well, and yeah, there's a whole lot you got to learn, that's for sure. So, 5,000 words an hour, right to market. So, those are all part of the Write Faster, Smarter set of books that you wrote. And that's
Hmm.
probably one of the things that really grabbed my eye when I was new or newer to this. I think I published 2 books and they weren't doing great. They're both nonfiction. And I picked up Right to Market because I heard you on a podcast.
Hmm.
And I'm just like, oh shoot, I totally did this wrong. you know, I had my reasons
We all
for it.
had that same epiphany. Trust me, I had that
Oh
same moment myself.
man, I was just like, holy catfish, this is terrible. And I'm like, I am doing this wrong. And I'm like, okay. So how did this all start? How did it happen for you? These books that are, by the way, fantastic. Whenever you came out with one after I read Right to Market first, and then I bought whatever was before that and what was after that.
So 5,000 words per hour, then lifelong writing habit, and then Write to Market. How the books came about is I started reading every book I could get my hands on craft. If I wasn't writing on during my morning commute into the city, I was reading or listening to a book on craft and trying to get better. And one of the biggest challenges I faced that I think a lot of authors faced at the time was writing faster. How do I get more books out when I work 12 hours a day at a startup? It's so difficult to find time.
Sure.
And so I wanted to find ways to do that. And there weren't very many books on the subject, and most of them were really bad, epically bad, super terrible. I mean, like absolutely worthless, where it's a bunch of blog posts that were gathered together in a haphazard fashion. And not
Mm,
all of them were. Rachel Aaron's 2K to 10K was great. I love that one. That was the first one that gave me kind of a practical approach at getting better. And I realized, wait, she did that in a very short amount of words. Like that could have been a blog post. And I thought, if I write a super short writing book that teaches somebody a skill that's useful, maybe they'll buy it. So, right when I wrote 5,000 words per hour, I think it's like 11,000 words total. So it was
mhm.
like 2 days of work.
Yeah.
It's a super short book. You can read it in like an hour and a half. And I put it out there to see, will writers appreciate this? And I learned yes, writers value their time. They don't want long books. They want a super short book that has the secret spelled out in an easy way for them to implement. If you can write a 10-page book and each page has a step and you get to the end of that and it's taught that author a new skill, they're thrilled and they're happy to throw money at you to give them that book. They
Right.
don't want fluff. They don't want to know anything about the author. They just want to be taught how to do the skill. And so I released a book that did that. It did really well. I made great money from it. It started to eclipse my fiction, which was
Okay.
really surprising. And I said, okay, I can do more of that. So I started looking at other skills I thought that authors needed access to. And one by one, I released skills in those areas. And I tried to build like a complete university course you could take as an author for under 20 bucks.
Yeah, it really it changed the way I looked at things, and I know it's changed the way other people have looked at things as well. Now, right to market, could you explain what that concept actually is?
Sure. The concept of writing to market is simply understanding who your market is before you sit down to write. And it doesn't mean that you have to write anything specific. It just means that you understand how your market is going to react to it. So, as an example, many of your fans probably watched the TV show Game of Thrones.
Mhm.
If you understand your audience, you know that they value the fact that this is a medieval setting. And so if you do things like you have armies cross the world in an hour and a half, you're going to really upset your fans, which is what happened in season 7 of Game of Thrones. And so a whole bunch of
Mhm.
mistakes were introduced because you had people who didn't understand their market. They didn't know what their market was craving. When you're writing to market, you need to understand sort of what people are looking for and what's going to be planting a landmine that's really going to upset readers and lead to 1-star reviews. Military science fiction fans are looking for something very, very different from people that are reading romance.
Sure.
There's sort of an emotional resonance that they are seeking, and it's our responsibility as authors to know what that is. It's easier than it sounds. What I recommend most authors do is just make a list of the genres that you really like, and then try to figure out which one of those is the most popular genres. If you want to write um, polka battle rap, probably don't do that. Maybe go for like, epic fantasy or crime thrillers, something that's going to be more
Mhm.
marketable. It's picking something you're really jazzed up and excited to write, but that there's a market out there, and the market well. If you haven't read a bunch of crime thrillers, deciding you're going to go write a crime thriller tomorrow is a terrible idea. You have to know your market, and that starts with knowing the body of work that represents that market.
So how, okay, say, I like crime books, like thrillers and mysteries, but, this genre that I like, that I read and I listen to audiobooks and all that kind of stuff is just flooded with books. How do I get around that?
Ignore it. At this point, we are far enough along. It's not 2012 anymore. It's not 2014. It's not 2016. Every market is saturated. Your job is to build a new niche. So what you're going to do is you're going to look at, okay, let's say crime fiction has 47 different niches,
Right,
and one
right.
of them is supernatural crime where you've got judges that are fairies.
Okay.
You take that thing that you're reading that you love and you turn it on its head and you take it in a new direction. And there's never a point at which you can't do that. No matter what is hot right now, in what genre it's hot right now, you can look at that and say, okay, maybe I could do this. An example I would give you is, gosh, I want to say Lucy Score, a romance author who she turned the billionaire trope on its head, where instead of looking for the billionaire as the heroine protagonist, you are the billionaire, and they were tremendously successful. They blew up. It's brainstorming and considering, because I know my market, and I know what they like, what else might they like that doesn't currently exist, and then build that.
Okay. So it's still taking a little bit of a leap of faith because, say like romance, that's probably one of the biggest markets there is, and that's also probably the most saturated out of those.
Mhm.
So what you're saying is, damn the torpedoes, go straight ahead and do something that is a little bit different and that you're behind, that you can get your head into.
Exactly. And by doing that, you're going to push the envelope a little bit in your genre, which readers are going to love. And hopefully will keep you interested, because as an author, ideally, we're a hyper reader of our genre. So we're sort of like, the top tier of those readers. So we're going to stay interested as well because we're writing something new. If military science fiction is not something you're passionate about, and in my case, it's not. I mean, I like it. It's
Hmm.
fun. But it's not a passion. It's not something I want to spend the rest of my career doing, like many wonderful science fiction authors out there. So there's only so many stories I want to tell there. I realized I would be better served finding an area that had an equally rabid audience that I was more excited to write for.
Okay, well, that makes a ton of sense to me. Another one that jumped out at me when I was looking at your books, I think the first time I ever heard you on a podcast was 5,000 words an hour. And I'm like, how the heck can I do that? Could you kind of explain that a little bit?
Yeah, I could break it down very simply. The title is meant to be clickbait.
Oh, it
The
is, yeah.
only way I've ever seen anybody reach 5,000 words per hour, which I myself have done and easily and consistently, is through dictation. If you're doing voice dictation, it is cake to reach 5,000 words per hour because you speak so much faster than most people type. Really fast typists tend to tap out at about 100 words a minute, and speaking, you can easily do 150. So voice dictation is a great way to get there. But to be honest, my quest is more typing based these days. I don't mind dictating, but because I have the luxury of working in my own office, I have the time to type and I prefer that. So my
Mm.
actual typing speed is about 3,500 words an hour. And how I get there is just a simple series of steps to block out my entire environment. I set a timer and I write to that timer. It's called a writing sprint. The goal is to get yourself into flow state. And by blocking out all distractions and putting yourself up against a timer, it's a natural environment for your brain to get into the story. You're basically just creating a canvas and letting whatever story you had in mind flow out on it. You make an environment where that's naturally going to happen. And because we are creatures of habit, if you do this in the same way, in the same place every day, and you follow the same steps, your brain will start doing it faster and faster and faster and faster. So
Mm.
now I can sit down at my keyboard. I don't have to do anything. Scrivener is the first thing that I see when I open my computer. I've already got the chapter I'm supposed to be working in up. I just sit down and start writing. And I'm usually done with my writing pretty quickly because I know ahead of time what I'm going to write. And I have this series of steps that I follow to the letter.
Okay. As far as dictation goes, were you using like Dragon or like special software for that?
I was using Dragon to parse the recordings that I made, but the recordings were just using an iPhone. So I just used the record feature on an iPhone. I would speak my punctuation. So I would say period at the end of a sentence.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then when I would get home, I would dump it into Dragon and Dragon would transcribe it for me. But
Mm.
now there are much better transcription services and you don't even necessarily need to speak your punctuation anymore. It'll figure out where your paragraphs are based on pauses
Really?
in your speech.
Wow.
Yeah.
What
So
what
there's
are those? Do you know?
I personally haven't used it. Thomas Unstadt on the Novel Marketing Podcast is where I heard about it.
Mm.
So I know that it exists. I haven't used it myself.
Do you know the name of that or that
I could look
software?
it up and send it to you for so maybe in the show notes, but I don't
Okay.
off the top of my head.
All right. Very good. All right. Now, you wrote these books in the Write Faster, Smarter series. It's been a couple of years, hasn't it? It's
Yeah,
been
I stopped publishing them in 2019.
okay. So since then, what's changed, do you think, that maybe a second edition of some of this could go like, and we can focus more on like the right to market and the 5,000 words an hour. That's fine.
Not enough to justify second editions, which is why there
Okay.
aren't second editions for those books. I
Gotcha.
feel like the fundamentals of our career are evergreen and they're never going to change. We're going to reach readers in the same way. We're going to try to approach our marketing in the same way. We're going to want to understand not what we want, but what our readers, our audience want. And if we keep doing that and writing good books and making sure we have amazing covers, you're going to sell books. And it's not any different doing that now than it was in 2014. Although it's funny, if you go back to 2014, people were saying exactly the same things. The gold rush is over. It's super saturated. You can't sell books. It's time to get out of it. It's not like it was back in 2011.
Right. So, speaking of, writing to market, you're kind of tagged as the right to market guy. When I've been to conferences or talking to other authors, do you like that or
No,
no?
no, I don't.
I
Sure
kind of
don't.
thought so. Because I was like, oh yeah, Chris Fox, the right to market guy, and I'm just like, well, there's more to Chris than just that. But I remember listening to you on a podcast. I cannot remember which one it was, but you were talking about marketing and keywords and getting more focused with that. And it wasn't just like, say you're writing crime fiction and put down like detective or sleuth. You were saying try and figure out who your readers were, their age, their gender, when did they grow up, what were they watching on TV.
Mhm.
Could you kind of explain that a little bit? Does that still
Yeah,
hold true?
it very much does. And in fact, I'm actually working on this year's presentation for 20 books in another
Hmm.
window, and I'm going over that part of
Oh,
it.
cool. Well, look at
so
that.
so what we do is we go through the audience and you ask all these questions. What books were your audience reading in 1980? What were they reading in 1985? What were they reading in 1990? What were they watching during all of those same times? And what you end up with is this absolutely massive list of keywords. And you ask, what video games are they playing? Did they play video games? Did they play board games? What were the cultural phenomena going on right around then? And what are the things that they would recognize? Are they familiar with 9/11? Would 9/11 symbology work if you're writing in, say, crime thrillers or some sort of military thrillers? Are there some areas where there's overlap? So you think about all these things that people experience throughout their lives and you try to find kind of almost back doors and sideways into reaching their psyche. And you can do that through symbolic recognition. All of us have powerful links to things that we saw in our childhood,
Sure.
and calling those things up now happens very quickly. You know, if you loved the Disney movie The Black Cauldron when you were a little kid, seeing a cauldron as an adult may have a very profound effect on you, even if you don't recognize it. You don't necessarily know, but you might stop and look at a book because you're like, oh, that's like this book that I remember from when I was a little kid. So
Yeah.
if you as an author can be a detective and sort of sleuth out what common cultural experiences our audience has that we all recognize, it gets real easy to put a book in front of them that they're going to love.
So I'm a newer or maybe even a new author that doesn't have much of, an email list, or, it kind of vague as far as who my fans are. How do I do that? How do I dig in there and find that information?
The good news is that everybody's solved this equation already. So you're going to find the people who've solved it, the authors in your genre that are doing this successfully, and you're going to find out where they're schooling, and you're going to join that school of fish, and you're going to watch what they do, and you're going to be nothing but polite and courteous. And when you're asking questions, and you're not going to ask them to promote your book, and you're not going to, try to be a nuisance to any of them. You're just going to observe what they do. And the beauty of social media nowadays is whether it's Facebook or Instagram or TikTok, somewhere your tribe of authors hangs out, and the people who are at the very top of their game are there. There is no one today that you can't reach in the author community. From the very top to the very bottom, you could probably reach that person if you're determined. So find the people who are successfully doing what you want to do and then start emulating them.
As far as what? Like, would you instant message them and say, "Hey, what keywords are you using?" Or probably not that brash, but what
You
what
could, yeah, and I get
okay.
I get that at least 2 or 3 times a week. Now, I would obviously be a lot more polite in my my approach to it.
Sure.
I would ask them, hey, listen, I'm trying to promote this book here. I'm trying to promote this book here. I think my wife is putting groceries away.
Okay.
I'm trying to promote this book here. Um, I lost my train of thought.
You're gonna be talking to like maybe a higher tier author. It's like a cold I message or
So
whatever.
you're
Yeah.
approaching them for the first time, and you're
Hmm.
looking for a very specific answer. So
Yes.
obviously, a small piece of information you think they can help with, and it might be keywords. You're saying, "Hey, listen, I think these keywords may work on this book in our genre. Can you suggest a few more?" And maybe they can't, and they won't. That's fine. They'll tell you that. But
Sure.
oftentimes, they're willing to help. And almost always, when I've approached an author who is more successful than I am politely, they've been willing to help me out and give me a bit of information, or maybe just direct me to somebody else that can help me. So sometimes they don't have the answer you're looking for, but they'll say, "Oh, I know this other author who writes in your genre who maybe can help you." So um, just don't be afraid to ask. It just,
Yeah.
as long as you're being polite, there's no harm. All they can do is say, "Hey, no," and block you.
Right. No restraining orders, hopefully. So yeah,
Yeah.
don't get to that don't get that far, guys. All right, don't do that. But it's funny you say that, because I have just messaged people or approached people that I don't know. I did that
Hmm.
with you with your narrators for your
Hmm.
books, and it's like, okay, I really like your narrator, and I would just so I think I DM'd you on Facebook or something like that, and
Hmm.
to my surprise, you answered and you're like, "Hey, blah blah blah," and I'm just like, "Wow, thank you." And
So
I've done that for other things as well.
if we jump back to 2015, when nobody knew who I was, I started messaging people in exactly the same way. I sent a message to A.G. Riddle, who was very successful, had written the Atlantis Gene, and started
Yeah,
asking him some questions about what he'd done. I messaged Simon Whistler, who ran the Rocking Self
rocking.
Publishing
Yeah, yeah,
podcast,
you betcha.
and started asking him some questions. And eventually I pitched him for an episode. I said, "Hey, listen, I think that your audience will get a lot of benefit out of this. And here are the things that they will get out of it. Not that I'll get out of it, but
Hmm.
that they'll get out of it." And I brought a lot to the table. And of course, they had me on an episode. I gave a good show, and other people heard it and started inviting me on. But it's really about looking for what can I do to help the people around me, and then also studying people who are successful. That's all it takes. Just watch what they're doing, listen to their good ideas, and oftentimes they will share. It's amazing to me how much information is given away in this industry about being successful.
Yeah, I don't know if it's like that in traditional publishing, but in the indie world, which I'm pretty much exclusively in, people are so nice. It's not this fierce competition. It's like, what? You and I are both, writing about martial art pandas. or whatever. And it's like, Chris is doing a little bit better than me. I'm not going to help him at all. It's not like that at all. And that's one of the things I really enjoy about being in this community.
Mhm.
That
In my experience, TradPub is very similar in that regard. It doesn't
okay,
feel like a competition. Especially 10 years ago, I saw a lot more of them looking down their nose at the indie community, but now it feels like we work more hand in glove than we used to. And many
right.
of us have become hybrids. So you have people who started as trad pub who've kind of crossed the fence, and you have people like me who started as Indian who are now doing hybrid stuff. And I think there's, I don't know, a lot more cooperation than there used to be. That's for sure.
Right. So, speaking of selling books, what do you think is selling books today? It's October 2021. What do you think is the best way to sell books? What's pushing the needle the most?
It's going to vary based on your genre, but the
Hmm.
question you ask yourself is how old is my audience and where are they hanging out? If the answer is primarily on TikTok, then that's where you want to be advertising. If the answer is that they're on Facebook, which has been true for the last 5, 6, 7 years, you can reach a tremendously large audience on Facebook and on Instagram, which you can do kind of both ads at the same time. So I employ ads on a variety of platforms. I do ads on Reddit, but it depends on what book I'm promoting. I
Mm,
would never in a million years try to sell military science fiction on Reddit, but I do sell a lot of lit RPG there. So it's really knowing, I think, what my audience is interested in and trying to tailor my advertising budget to their platform. So I don't have like one strategy or one platform that's better than another.
hmm.
The bedrock for everything, of course, is Amazon advertising itself. I think nothing is ever going to eclipse that in terms of usefulness. I'll always have some Amazon ads running. The very first thing I do is go create a low ad spend ad for every marketplace in the world for whatever new book I have coming out, and those run eternally. I never turn those off. So every one of my books has at least a few ads running to that. Um, Amazon is good in that way, but beyond that,
Yeah.
I would say make your basket of advertising match your genre specifically.
How do I know? Excuse me. How do I know where my readers are hanging out as far as social media goes? How am I going to know that?
um, you need you need to start seeing ads for books that are in your genre. If you're
Okay.
not scrolling through your feed and seeing those, you're doing it wrong. So you need to be clicking on things that your audience would click on and joining conversations your audience would join on. And if you do that, then as far as Facebook or any other social media platform is concerned, you are your audience. And so they're going to start serving you the content your audience sees, and
Okay.
then just become a part of the school. You're like, oh, okay, I see this types of ads and they seem like they're working. People are using animations now in their ads. I'm going to start using animations and try it and see how it works. And it unfortunately is constant experimentation. It's doing an action every day and it's participating in your community every day, at least browsing through it and reading and looking at some posts, even if you're not doing anything else. I subscribe to the newsletters of everybody that's in my genre, and I look what
Hmm.
they're sending out and I kind of examine their tactics. And it can take some time, but you start finding patterns, and all you have to do is use those patterns to craft stuff that works for you. So don't feel like you have to do every tactic that's successful. But if you see a tactic that's successful that feels like it'd be easy for you to do it.
Okay. That makes sense. So, what books do you read? What if you do have time to do such a thing? What books do you
Almost
enjoy reading?
almost exclusively nonfiction at this point. And the reason for that is I like learning new things.
Mm.
So I read recently The World History of Salt and learned how important salt is to humans and how little time we can go surviving without salt,
Oh,
and how it's driven wars and currency and really shaped our entire globe. So I'll pick something like that. I did another one that was the autobiography of Albert Einstein, not the biography of Albert Einstein,
yeah.
but it also teaches you relativity and physics. So
Hmm.
it was kind of a two in one deal where you learned what it was he discovered and what his special relativity was, and
Yeah.
all of the things that he contributed, and then also knew who he was as a person. So I found that fascinating, and so I'm always looking at books like that. I do love good fiction, but I don't have the windows of time that I used to have. So it'll take me like 4 weeks to get through one nonfiction book.
How do you consume your books? Are you paperback, Kindle,
Prim-
audio?
Primarily audio,
Okay, me too.
and I'll
I
listen while I work out or
right.
traveling.
Yep. If I'm in my car, if I'm working out, or whatever, I'm usually listening to a podcast or an audiobook. Sometimes music, but not as much, not very often. And I love music, but it's like this is my time to catch up on all that. So
Exactly.
you're a writer by trade. That's how you make your living. what does your day look like? Are you one of those guys that wakes up at 5 o'clock in the morning and just starts pounding the keyboard right away and has a X amount of time blocked off, or how do you do
Man, I miss those days so much.
it?
I used to be exactly that. So I would wake up at 5 a.m. I would go to the gym. I would hit it hard, and I would think about what I was going to write. And I'd come
Yeah.
home and by like 6:30, I've showered, I sit down, and I just start cranking words like mad. And by like 11:30 or so, I'm done with my words for the day.
Mm,
And then my afternoon after lunch would all be working on business stuff or plotting or thinking about the next day's words. Today, things are quite a bit different. I wake up at 4:30 or 5 a.m. My alarm is set for 5, but it almost never goes off. I'm usually up earlier than that. I will work out as quickly as I can. It's definitely a race. I'm trying to do it, as quickly as I can. It's right behind me here in this garage,
yeah.
doing my weights. And then as soon as I'm done working out, I sit down and I start writing. And my goal is by the time my son wakes up at 7 a.m., I want to have 2,000 words down. So I'll have
Okay.
worked out and have written at least 2,000 words. More is better. In some cases, I can get my full 5,000, but that's very rare, just because it takes time to plot and think about the
Hmm.
scenes that I'm writing. So then I'll head into the house. I don't come back out until 8:30. From 8:30 to 10:30, I get to write. And then at 10:30, I come back in and I watch my son, and then I go to lunch. So my whole day is structured like that, where you have, these little pockets and windows, excuse me, and I get about 7 hours a day to work. I used to work for like 16 hours a day. So
Oh
prior to
wow.
my son being born. So like it over, it cut it by over 50%.
Sure, sure. Well, that makes sense to me because I have 4 kids and I went through the same thing. I worked at night. I worked 7 at night till 3 in the morning, and I did that for 4 years, and then I worked midnight to 8 in the morning for 13 years. So you just don't know which end is up. But spoiler alert, your kids do grow up, and then it's like at first you're like, whew, they're in school now. This is really cool. I can get stuff done. And then there's a party that's like, I kind of miss being around them. It's like,
I,
okay, you know what I
I love
mean?
it. Like
Yeah.
it's the best thing I've ever done. Like I would not trade being a dad for anything. I love hanging out with my son. So it makes being an author harder, but man, it's really awesome.
Yeah. Working midnight to 8 a.m. I was tired all the time. I felt like I was hungover without the party the night before. And yeah, it's like, okay, they're very demanding and all that, but then I got a chance to go to field trips. I got a chance to do stuff, with their school stuff when they grew up that other dads didn't get a chance to do.
Mhm.
And I was probably one of the only dads doing it, and I thought that
Well,
was
have
cool,
a virtual dad high five because I want to do exactly the
Yep.
same thing.
Absolutely. It's a great feeling. It really is. But it goes by fast. Your kids wind up in college or whatever afterwards, and you're like, okay, grandkids. Yay, yay for grandkids. I've got one. All right. So, um, where do you get your ideas for your books?
um, that's a question I think it's as old as time. I think
Sure.
John Cleese gave the best answer to it. And
Okay.
he said, I get them from a little woman who lives in a shack on the Isle of Wight called, Mildred. And then he starts laughing because he's like, your ideas come from your subconscious. You can't know where ideas will come from. But
Mm,
he immediately turns around, of course, and gives you the perfect bit of advice, now that he's made fun of us all. If you want to have great ideas, fill your head with great things. So watch, read, and listen to great stories. Read great books, watch great TV stories, shows, find great life stories, listen to people around you. I mean, really listen to them, listen to what their lives are like and what their concerns are. And as you're listening to them, have the writer going in the back of your head and ask yourself, what is this person's motivation? What are they really after? What do they want out of life? And as time goes on, you start doing that for a lot of different people. Your characters are going to take on those qualities because you're going to
mm.
start infusing them with the bits that you've learned from the real world and from the stories that you've read.
Okay, that makes a ton of sense to me. So, what is some of the best or worst advice that has been given to you? And it's, regarding writing, publishing, all that kind of stuff.
Let's see. I think I did videos on these recently, so I should have
Oh,
answers
okay.
ready. What is the best writing advice I've received? Finish the book.
Okay.
Finish the book. So I think a lot of your audience probably has had experiences in person where you go to writing groups, and there's always one person in that writing group who has been working on the same book for
Oh,
22 years.
yes.
Uh,
Yes.
don't be that person. Just finish the story, accept that story is not perfect. The story is actually a vehicle for you, the author, to improve your level of skill. So the best advice that I got was just start finishing stories. Now, when you finish 40 novels like I have, all of a sudden you understand your craft, and now you can write that novel you wanted to write when you first started.
That's excellent advice. And kind of circling back to what we were talking about before, it's if you want a good life, and not to be too like broad or sunshine and rainbows, but if you want a decent life, you hang around with people that are positive.
Mhm.
If you hang around negative Nellies, and we all know who they are, and all they do is catastrophize 24/7, well, it's just gonna drag you down. So
Mhm.
I'm a huge believer in that, and that makes a total sense to me. All right, let's see here. What was your favorite failure or victory in the book biz?
Favorite failure or victory? Like, what are some moments that leap out at me? My favorite failure took place in an Austin, Texas hotel room in 2016.
Wow, that's specific.
I had just finished the 21-day novel challenge like a month beforehand. So what I had done is kicked off my YouTube channel and said, okay, I'm going to write and edit this military science fiction novel on camera, and then I'm going to publish it. I'm going to sell a whole bunch of copies. It's going to do really well, and I'm making a bunch of money. And so I had done that. And I put it out there and it did really well and I made a bunch of money. And so I'm feeling on top of the world. And I'm at the Smarter Artist Summit in 2016. And I get back to my hotel room and I'm looking and I'm seeing how well the sales are going. And I'm super happy. And then I open my email and there's email after email after email. And they all say, Chris, pro epilogue, epilogue, epilogue. And I'm like, what? And so I look and the book has the wrong character name. So instead of the character that should have been, it's the protagonist. And I made the wrong substitution in like 8 different places.
Oh my.
Um, but I just thought it was funny because there were so many arguments going on at the time about quality versus quantity, and there was the proof that you do have to cut some corners in order to write as fast as I wrote.
Sure. Okay. That's funny. I like that. You even had the time and the date. Wow, you that's impressive. All right. Are you a plotter or a pantser?
Plotter. But
Okay.
I use a process called plot gardening. I mean, I've got a book about it
Yes.
because you can't let plotting be a straitjacket. There's got to be the freedom for characters to be characters and the world to be the world. But I still need to have a general idea of what the story is.
Speaking of gardening, in one of I was either a video or a book, I can't remember which. You had there was a discussion against gardening and hunting. Could you kind of shed some light on that?
Yeah, I think the title was "Marketing is Farming, Not Hunting."
Yeah, that's what it was.
Um,
Yeah.
Yeah, so the basic idea is most people think of marketing as hunting. You go out there and you're shooting reader buffalo. It's actually farming. You want readers to come back over and over and over again. So if you think of it like an orchard, I'm growing an apple tree, and every time I put out a new release, I go around and I pick all the new apple sales because I have all these readers. Whereas a lot of people look at it just like I get the reader once and I never think about the reader again. I don't have a reader group set up. I don't have an email list set up. I'm not, giving them polls and ways to participate in my content, and I'm not having them bring other readers into the fold.
Hmm.
Um, you really can approach it much more organically, and you have to think about readers as a resource that you need to nurture, not as a kind of one and done transaction.
Okay. Very cool. All right. KU or wide?
KU currently, that's mostly because of ease of use. I think both of them are equally viable.
Okay. All right. What advice would you give your 21-year-old self?
So 21-year-old self would be in the year 2000.
What were you doing?
I, in the year 2000, had just been laid off from a software engineering job. I spent like
Okay.
7 months unemployed, and then I got
Dang.
into the mortgage industry. So I'd probably give myself some messed up cryptic warning that meant nothing and just mess with me because if I changed anything else at all, my son might not be born.
Okay. All right. Oh my. So you have a YouTube channel. Are you still active on that? Or
Yeah, I've been less active probably for the last 2 years. So I try to get videos up every week, but it works out to more like every other week a lot of the time.
Hmm.
Some of them are esoteric. I do some random topics, but the vast majority of them are about the skills necessary to be an author. The thing I've become most well known for is motivation for authors. So probably 50% of them are just a motivational video about you can do this because whoever you are listening to this, if you want to be an author and you want to publish books, you can do this. Like there's no special thing that I have or anyone else has that you don't have that's going to keep you out of this. Almost anyone can succeed. So give it a shot.
Okay. So if somebody that's listening to this is considering starting their own YouTube channel, who is it for? Who should start one, do you think?
I think a YouTube channel is a tremendous like money pit. And when I say money, I don't mean actual money. I mean more like capital, like time.
Mm,
You're not going to get a lot out of YouTube channels. And I've seen a lot of really successful authors make YouTube channels and upload like 4 videos and that's it. They stop. They never do it again. You have to like it. Like if you like editing videos and making videos, then absolutely do that. But it's the same thing that I would give advice for any social media. Only use social media you enjoy doing, and only then YouTube counts as social media. So if you're the type of author who enjoys talking on camera and you think that you're somewhat elegant, if you're attractive, it helps too. I'm not going to lie. Lots of beautiful people make great videos.
sure.
Those are the type of people who should think about it. But that's not necessarily either. If you're funny, you can do it too. So
Hmm.
I don't think it has to be a leg in your tripod for marketing. But if you like it, do it.
What do you think the benefits are for it, or the
I think
negatives?
that you
Well, we
the
talked
the
about the
pos
negatives. It's a time suck. And but
there's more negatives. So the primary positive the primary positives are you reach an entirely different market than you ordinarily would. So lots of the people that I bring into my fold for readers never encounter any of the podcasts that I would be on. They don't listen to the same resources or hang out on Facebook
mm,
or any of the same places that all the 20 books people are. So this is a whole different sea of people that you're reaching. It's much
okay,
more global. It's not just the United States. You're getting people all over the world. I think that's the tremendous benefit of it. As
okay,
far as the negatives, it detracts a lot from your brand as a fiction author. So you become the right to market guy
right.
and you're not, the fantasy author guy that you might necessarily want to be. So, be cognizant, I think, of that cost going into it. But if that's attractive to you and you don't mind it, it's a lot of fun.
Okay. You ever think about starting your own podcast? You've been a guest on a
Yes,
ton of them.
actually. I have, and I've gone as far as registering the domain name and thinking about it. There was an old podcast back in the day that I'm seriously thinking about reviving some version of it. It was called the Author Roundtable,
I've heard of it, but I
and
don't think I ever listened
it
to it.
ran for years and it changed hands like 3 times before it died finally.
Okay.
And what they did is they had like 2 or 3 hosts who were responsible for running it, and every week they'd get 2 different guests that would sit on the panel, and they would just talk about whatever the news of the week was or whatever they wanted to talk about. And I feel like there's a lot of room for that. I'd love to structure it probably more for science fiction and fantasy primarily
Mm,
authors, but I think that'd be a lot of fun to do. And I'd just start, inviting on all the authors that I know.
outstanding. Yeah, it's a lot of work. I started this one in February, I believe,
Mhm.
and it is unbelievable the time suck that it has become, but I enjoy doing it. And
Mhm.
it's a lot of fun talking to people like you, and from a selfish standpoint of view, I'm learning a ton.
Mhm.
By listening to all these different authors that most of them are much better than me, have sold, far more books and are much more successful. And it's like, oh, okay, I'm asking these questions, and there are some questions where there's a lot of similarities among the authors that are very successful.
Mhm.
They don't do things exactly the same, but they're. I would think the thing that really pops out at me is the work ethic.
Mhm.
You just don't snap your fingers and this just happens. The work ethic for you and the other authors that are really pushing the needle there, they work hard. There's no substitution for it. All
Yeah,
right.
I like the iceberg analogy a lot, which is that there's the 90% of the success is the stuff you're not seeing happening every day, the daily routines, the suffering.
Yeah,
They just see the success at the top. But once you know that 90% exists, if you're willing to do it, anybody can get to the top of that iceberg.
absolutely. So, we're getting close to the end of our little chat here. But one question I like to ask authors, it's kind of fun, is one of your favorite characters in your book, say that series becomes a TV show or a movie, who would you want playing them? Or playing you if you were in a movie or a TV show?
Oh wow, that's a great question. I would probably want to do the Magitech Chronicles, and I would have a known, I mean, basically a no-name actor play him, and that's the narrator for the books. His name is Ryan Kennard Burke. He's become a really
Oh,
good
yeah.
friend of mine. He flew out to you. He's your narrator too, I believe. He
Yes, he
flew
is.
out to Vegas and he played the Magitech Chronicles with us and stuff. And he's actually, among many other things, a really skilled martial artist.
Oh,
So he could be an action star. I would love to put him in the role of playing Aaron that he's already voiced in the books and have him be the like live action version of it too. That would be so amazing.
wasn't he a stuntman too? I think he
Yeah.
was.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's right. Because, yeah, and
Mhm.
again, I put myself out there. I'm looking for a narrator, and I asked Chris because I liked his narrator, and boom, I got a narrator. And yeah,
Mhm.
it worked out great. And, but none of that ever happens unless you do it. You have to,
And it gets more ridiculous than that. Like if you want Nathan Fillion, I watched Rhett Bruno do that from Aethon Books. If you want, like, you can get anybody that you want in this industry if you've got the wherewithal to go out there and find them. We live in a truly global society for the first time in history. No one is out of your reach online.
right. Yeah, I totally, totally agree with you on that one. All right. Uh, exercise. I'll finish with this. I think you started lifting weights, and you started talking about exercise more when you were getting interviewed. When was that? Maybe 5, 6 years ago? Maybe more than that.
I've been lifting heavy since probably 2012.
Okay. What kind of benefits do you think you're getting? Or there's being an author is, especially a full-time author, is kind of a sedentary lifestyle. You're sitting down a lot. And what benefits have you seen from that?
Probably the most concrete to your audience is it combats depression and it helps me stay like regulated so I can actually get things done in my work. I mean, I just feel better when I work out. And when the pandemic hit, I was unable to work out for over a year.
Oh,
That
wow.
was the worst year physically for me. I gained a bunch of weight. I'm still trying to take it off now.
Sure.
I really struggled. I felt weak. My self-esteem was impacted. You don't have nearly as much testosterone in your body, and you don't realize what testosterone is doing until
Hmm.
it leaves. And for those that don't know, testosterone is the chemical that makes effort feel good. So having that go away or go down means that you tend to get less stuff done. I started working out again. I built my gym in my garage, and immediately within like 4 weeks, I started seeing how I had more energy. I was getting more words down. I felt better. So I really feel like it's not just your physical health, but also your mental health that will impact in a positive way.
Yeah, I'm a firm, firm believer in it. If I miss the gym for even like 1 or 2 days, I start hurting like in weird spots that I usually don't hurt. And I'm grumpy, and I'm that guy you don't want to be around. My wife is just like, you need to go work out. If I miss it, like, and she said, you didn't go to the gym today, did you? And I'm like, no. And she's like, yeah, you need to go. And I'm like, okay, honey. And she's at least my wife is totally cool with that, and she understands that's my wiring. I mean, I don't play golf. I'm not on a dart league. I don't play softball. I don't do a lot of stuff that a lot of other guys do. And my thing is, I like to go to the gym. I love to lift weights. I'll do some cardio. Then I come back and I feel like a new man.
Mhm. Likewise.
Yeah. It.
I wouldn't trade it for anything. Henry Rollins has some really good things to say about the iron and like how it speaks to you. I mean, it
Mhm.
really focuses me, and I can't even express it. It's just so amazing.
Right. And yeah, I was talking to a physical therapist. I blew out my shoulder a couple of times in my lifetime, and she's like, "Yeah, motion's lotion. If you stop using it, it's gonna stop." So
Mhm.
it's like, and I think what you were saying with your brain, with depression, with just feeling better, it's
Mhm.
huge. That hit of dopamine is amazing, and
Mhm.
I can't. And everybody, it's like you don't. If you haven't worked out for 20 or 30 years, you're not going to jump off from behind your desk and run a marathon or bench press 500 pounds. Baby steps.
Mhm.
Just there's nothing wrong with. Everybody has their own jam. If you're a good swimmer, go out and swim. If you enjoy lifting weights, go lift weights. If you like doing yoga, do yoga. Everybody's got their thing that makes them happy, but get that blood circulating. However you can,
Absolutely.
do it. All right. So I think we'll end it here, Chris. Where can people find you?
My best website's probably chrisfoxwrites.com. You can find most of my videos and books there, and then links to various podcasts. If you're a YouTube fan, youtube.com/chrisfoxwrites.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today, Chris. Like I said before, this is almost surreal. Oh, one more thing I wanted to throw at you. I remember listening to something about you talking about you're more of an introvert, like a lot of authors are. But you speak a lot on stage. You do videos. I've seen you in front of audiences of a lot of people. Do you get nervous?
It crushes me. I flew back to the hotel room, and this has actually impacted some of my relationships with people at conferences because lots of people think I'm really like arrogant and aloof because I blow off social engagements because I can't handle it. So like I'll get out there. Like the first year at 20 books, people
Yeah.
followed me into the bathroom. I mean, it was terrifying. And it was everywhere, and I can't handle it because I'm such a massive introvert where like people assume I'm super extroverted because you see all these videos of my face, but they don't realize it's just me alone in my garage.
So
So
how do
I
you
really
combat it when
struggle.
you're up on stage? You know you're going to be up there. I mean, obviously you get a little bit of the butterflies or whatever, but how do you combat that? Because you do a good job.
It's train it's training. You can't do it, I don't think, without training. So I was in Toastmasters for 5 years,
Ah.
and I spoke competitively. So you would give speeches every week, and the best speech would win a ribbon. And I've got a wall full of ribbons, of first
Mm.
place ribbons, and I learned to love it. I really enjoyed giving speeches, and you learn body language and how to modulate your voice, and how to have pregnant pauses, and how to read the audience and understand whether or not they're paying attention or are bored. To read their body language. So you learn a whole bunch of skills in Toastmasters, and you just keep practicing. When I showed up, I sounded like Elmer Fudd. I had a really hard time. It's not that I'm any less of an introvert. It's just that I'm trained.
All right. Well, you know what? I'm going to end it at that. Thank you so much for being here, Chris.
Thanks for having me.
All right.